Valerie was sitting next to me.
Yes.
Came back at 5:30. She thought the class was 5:30, and I told her, no, it's 7:30. She said, well, and I have to go.
She's an enthusiastic person.
Yeah, I enjoyed talking.
All right. All of us are to some degree interested in the philosophy of the Rosicrucian Fellowship, which is the public arm of the Rosicrucian Order. And some of us are on probation to the Rosicrucian Order. And in that sense, we are like what St. Paul says, we are prisoners of Christ. So if we are on probation to Christ and the Rosicrucian Order, we have conditions and duties that we have to fulfill. And the most important duty is to serve Christ and the elder brothers of the Rosicrucian Order by serving humanity. And we do that by using the talents that we have developed to meet specific needs in the world. And in order to improve our service, we must improve ourselves. And we purify ourselves, we cleanse ourselves of our indulgences and sins and earthly attachments and all of that, so that we can serve as invisible helpers. So when our bodies are asleep at night, we don't have to spend all of our energy cleaning them up, and we are free to do things in the inner worlds. And the cleansing is accomplished by performing probationary exercises. And we are to do these exercises daily. That's part of our duty. But beyond this, we have secondary duties. Things that will also help us to be more useful servants. Now, in the past few years, I've been traveling a lot through North America and South America, and I have met most of the Rosicrucian Fellowship groups and quite a few of other people who are on probation. And I tried to determine how well they were in the primary and secondary duties as given by Max Heindel. Almost all of the students and probationers that I met in these places were very ardent about serving and living a spiritual life. Most of them performed the exercises, but no one that I met felt good about how they were doing at performing the exercises, especially the retrospection exercise. While most of the people I met continue to work on the exercises, they're not as staunch about some of the secondary requests or duties that Max Heindel gave to us. And one example in particular is what we're interested in. Max Heindel asked us to study physiology. He said it would make us more helpful as invisible helpers and help us to advance as healers. He even suggested that we have study groups of probationers and students to learn physiology. And he hoped that eventually that we would even have healing groups. And as I have traveled around and visited all of these Rosicrucian Fellowship groups, I have learned that almost no one has done this. The only exception is if somebody is a doctor or some kind of healthcare professional. Those are the only people who have studied any physiology, and that was just part of their work. It seems that everyone else is too busy with the rest of their life to want to study physiology. For myself, I can't remember when it was that I began, but about 25 years, I would guess, 25 years ago, I decided to study elementary physiology. And I haven't always kept up with it every day. But when I have been faithful to this task, it has been nothing but miracle after miracle after miracle that we find in the human physical body. In fact, last week, it was discovered something that has never been known before about the physical body, and all the physiology textbooks are going to have to be changed. They have just discovered and mapped out a special lymphatic system for the brain, which is important because in the brain the lymph vessels have to be very tiny, which is why they weren't noticed before. And they are important for draining. And they're pretty certain that Alzheimer's may occur because of or contribute to Alzheimer's by the blocking of the lymph nodes. So the human physical body is a miracle, and it's just made up of many other miracles. And in these talks, we're going to encounter some of those miracles. Now, one of the blessings of doing this study is that as a result, I understand Rosicrucian philosophy and Rosicrucian astrology much better. Our dense physical body is a product of the evolutionary creation to which we belong. You might even say that the human dense physical body is a direct manifestation of all of the different conditions that we have gone through. All the cosmic principles relating to the hierarchies and everything else are built right into our physical body. And all of these principles are astrological principles. So you can see that all three studies come together. The various systems in the body and the organs and the other components of the dense physical body have been emanated through principle from divine spiritual hierarchies. And the way they function is a product of the astrological and conscious manifestations of how those hierarchies work. And it's just astounding how beautiful it is. So, the hierarchies work through the constellations, through the signs, and through the planets. Now, because of this, the study of physiology is a great way to understand and learn the Rosicrucian philosophy and astrology. While at the same time, we become better able to serve because we know what the body is intending to do and how it is intending to do it. And when we know that, we can do ever so much better. After a few years of studying physiology, I mentioned it to my friend Jorge Rey, who lives in Medellin, Colombia. We would give talks in Medellin, and then at night we would go walking. And while we were walking, I happened to mention to him that I had discovered all sorts of new astrological things by studying physiology. In fact, this is a field that is so virgin that it's just ripe for harvesting, and nobody's doing it, and I don't understand why. So Jorge he put me on the spot, and he set up Skype conferences with people, several in Argentina, and several in Chile, and some in Ecuador, a few in Colombia. and sometimes the northern provinces of Miami and Southern California tune in too. So it's that kind of a thing. And it's a lot of work, but I'm enjoying every bit of it. Now there's one thing about all of this, and that is I am not qualified to speak about physiology. I'm not qualified to be an authority on spiritual things. And I'm probably not even qualified to be an authority on astrology, because I've gotten so far away from what everybody else is doing. So you have to take all of this with a grain of salt, and I thought my friend Bonnie, who is a physician, would be here tonight, and she would correct me if I make any mistakes along the way. These are going to be extremely simple physiology things. Extremely simple, baby steps, you might say. And I have checked, and sometimes checked multiple times to make sure that I haven't made errors about anything along the way. But be on your toes and catch me if you find where I'm making errors. Now these talks are going to be short, because they were meant to be not much more than an hour, because when you have translation, it takes a lot longer time, because, you know, I'd state a sentence or a phrase in English, and then it gets followed up in Spanish, and that takes up a lot of time. Now, the people who attend these talks by Skype don't necessarily need to study physiology to get the ideas and to have it in their consciousness, but I certainly recommend studying physiology if you can find any spare time at all. The big thing is, if we want to become conscious and better invisible helpers, this is something we should do. Now, most of us, when we're interested in the Rosicrucian philosophy, are children of fire as opposed to children of water. And the children of fire approach life differently from the children of water. And one of the chief differences is that the children of fire have to not only know that something is true, they have to know why it is true and how it actually functions. And that describes us. You might say that we are a Neptunian bunch. Uranus gives direct, full intuitions, but it doesn't give explanations. That's not good enough for Neptune. Neptune has to have the intuition, and it has to be able to make connections with principles. So that is why these talks are going to be of the flavor that they are in. Now, there's a very good thing in this, because if we once understand the principle and how it works, then it's very easy to apply it. And you can apply it in a lot of different ways. So, in these talks, we're going to try to maintain a reverent attitude about it all, because the human body really is a sacred instrument. But at the same time, I want to have fun, because the house, the fifth house that rules education or general education, is also the house that rules fun, and so it's going to be a matter of trying to have fun along the way. Now, when we started these talks, it was difficult to think of where to begin. Where do you go into a subject that is that total and that is that integral, all bound together? Because each part of it, astrology and philosophy and physiology, are very large subjects. You could almost enter into the study anywhere and be successful. And what I decided to do was follow the way of Max Heindel. And that is to try to understand the inner side of things by studying the sign that is opposite of the sign where the sun is in at the moment. And serendipitously, when these talks were begun, the sun was in Aries. And that means that the first talk would be about Libra. And it turned out to be a blessing, because one of the most important principles in all of physiology is a Libra principle. It is the principle of balance. In physiology, the critical balances in the body are called homeostases. In the way we conduct our psychological lives, the principle is called equipoise. If we have equipoise, we can deal with almost anything. But without balance, we can do almost nothing. But there's an irony in this. If we have perfect balance, we can't do anything either. The principle of balance, which is ruled by Libra, is itself balanced by Aries. We learn that from childhood. I can still remember the first time when I learned to ride a bicycle. If you try to sit on a bicycle that's standing still, it's extremely hard to keep balance. You lose balance and you tip over easily. However, if you're propelling the bicycle forward, it's easy or easier to maintain balance. In fact, if you have enough forward momentum, you can even take your hands off the handlebars and you're balanced and you can ride no hands. We used to think that was the cat's meow, to be able to ride no hands. In fact, I remember from a childhood magazine, I belonged to the Boy Scouts. These things come into your mind when you're talking like this. I was in the Boy Scouts and we had a magazine called Boy's Life. It was the four little panels. Guy going down the street on a bicycle, and he says, "Look, Ma, no hands." And then the next panel is a crash. And then he looks at you, "Look, Ma, no teeth." Crazy stuff. For a kid, that was really, really funny. So, if forward momentum helps balance, balance helps forward momentum, or we can't develop it that way. Now, this is a really simple example of how opposite signs of the zodiac balance with interlocking interdependence. And that applies with all of the signs of the zodiac, and not just Aries and Libra, but Aries and Libra set the tone for the whole zodiac. And this applies to physiology in many important ways. Life lives. Did I start this up? Yes, I did. Getting fast. Because I just remember somebody asked me, he said, "Be sure to record tonight." This means that life is active. Life in the body is never inactive. Not even if we are in a coma. There's a lot of life going on. It's a surprising amount of life going on. The vital body never gives up. It never surrenders until we pass out of the body in death. Even in sleep, part of the vital body hangs on and takes care of the physical body. This activity of life itself, the very living, interrupts homeostasis. The vital body would keep the body in balance all the time. But if we do things it takes us out of balance. This means that in our life, everything is a constant going into balance or out of balance. If you ever study the physiology of walking, when you walk, you're going out of balance and then you're catching yourself. And it's that principle all the way through in life. Now, the Rosicrucian philosophy teaches us that at this time in our evolution, consciousness soul or conscious soul, which is necessary for the awakening of consciousness, can only be developed within the dense physical body. No matter how much we contemplate the higher spheres and what kind of meditations we do or whatever, the development of new consciousness, waking consciousness, can only be brought about through the soul material that comes when we are in the dense physical body. The Rosicrucian cosmoconception teaches us that waking self-consciousness is primarily accomplished in the physical body and only in the dense physical body. From physiology, we learn that our consciousness is awakened in this environment through a constant struggle for balance while constantly going out of balance. This is the thing with all of physiology. It's a continuous, ongoing activity. There's no stopped action in it at all. Now, our dense physical bodies are interpenetrated by a desire body, a mind, and a vital body. They are all vehicles of consciousness of a threefold spirit. And the threefold spirit is what is conscious. It is the truth knower. Each of these bodies has a nature that it's all of its own. And its nature corresponds to the stuff out of which it was created. For example, the desire body is made out of desire stuff. And the desire body is always going to want to do what the desire world is made up of. It's going to want to emote, it's going to want to feel, it's going to want to desire, it's going to want to motivate. The purpose and function of the desire world is action, motivation to action. If we lived in the desire body alone, we would be in continuous action. That is, if we don't control our desires, we're after one thing after another, after another, after another. It's sort of like a hunting dog that you let loose after it's been penned up for a long time. It gets out in nature and it jumps here and it jumps there and everything has its attention. The vital body, the purpose of it is to sustain and to protect the dense physical body with life. If left alone, it would vegetate. We would become like vegetables, and people who withdraw so deeply from the physical and etheric bodies, we even call them vegetables. The vital body tries to maintain stasis all the time. It is, the vital body would have us be steady and even, except if the desire body, which has its own input, and I'm not talking about what the spirit does, I'm talking about the autonomy of each of the bodies, which the desire body interrupts. And so there is a constant struggle between the vital body and the desire body. But in this struggle, going back and forth to maintain or restore balance or homeostasis, or take it away from that, is where consciousness is born. This is one of the most remarkable statements I have ever encountered in my life, and it's a statement that Max Heindel makes in several places in the Rosicrucian philosophy. He says, all consciousness is a consequence of the struggle of the desire body and the vital body. They're struggling for control of the dense physical body where that conscious soul is developed. But we wake up, we're in that struggle. When it reflects back into the life spirit and the human spirit, that's where the consciousness becomes awake in the spirit. So from all of this, we can see that our whole life is going into and out of homeostatic balance. And it can be traced into our inner vehicles. All of that is again tied together in all human waking consciousness as a result of the struggle between the desire body and the vital body. So from this we can see how conscious soul and consciousness are accomplished. We can see that this is happening even if we are in a coma. There are stirrings of the desire body and the vital body. The vital body is happy with the coma. It can keep things going on forever. And we can see then how this is based on the Libra principle of balance. Now this is only the beginning of how this happens, and only on one major level of existence. There are many, many ways that balance is found in the dense physical body. Now, if there's balance, there is a center point. If we're riding the bicycle, that center point is the center of gravity. And we learn to feel the center of gravity until it becomes habitual to us and we don't even have to look for it anymore. However, whenever we do something, like taking steps in walking, that takes us off center. So the motivation to action, again, takes us off center. And then we have to correct. And so that things vibrate back to reestablishment of balance. If we get too far off balance with a bicycle, we fall. Now, some of the balances in the body and in our consciousness are very much like this. For example, one of the homeostatic balances is temperature. Temperature is ruled by Aries. But it's not the time to go into describing that rulership, but basically Aries is the hothead. Now normally the temperature of the human body is 37 degrees Celsius. That is the center. Sometimes if we have fever it gets higher, and sometimes if we're very relaxed it gets lower. And those states are called hyper and hypothermia. There are limits, just like there are limits to how far you can tilt on a bicycle without falling over. And the limits are determined by consciousness. If the temperature in the body gets too hot, we lose consciousness. If the temperature in the body gets too low, we lose consciousness. And we're saying that the development and waking of new consciousness is what the dense physical body is all about. So one of the homeostatic balances in the body is maintaining a proper temperature. Without that temperature, we cannot be awake and aware human beings. Now this is only one small example of how dependent the spirit is on a delicate balance in the body. There are so many of these balances that we can't begin to study all of them. Even the quality of our consciousness in the dense physical body depends on balance. And this is something that many people experience every day and they don't know it. One of the balances is that affects consciousness and affects it greatly is the sugar-insulin balance. Some people are not bright and fresh when they wake in the morning. And that's because they, during the fast of the night, their blood sugar has gone low. And they thrive on having a higher blood sugar. But some people understand that, but they make a mistake. And then what they do is they take in a lot of sugar in the morning. Orange juice has a lot of sugar in it. I have a friend who used to, he had psychological problems. And they gave him electroshock therapy, and they gave him insulin shock therapy. And he told me that to bring him out of insulin shock, they gave them glasses of orange juice because they were so sweet. Now, oranges are good food, but you got to be temperate. Because if you're not temperate, you, again, go to the limits of balance, and you find yourself off balance very quickly. Some people even go further and have sugar donuts first thing in the morning, and they zoom. It produces a hyperactivity. Especially children are too subject to that. So, a lot of people make bad decisions in their work because of the charge of high sugar in the blood. The time of the day that we're supposed to be strongest mentally is about 11 in the morning. But that isn't always the case because people have that coffee break. When they have coffee and a donut, they take off with the sugar charge and they don't make good decisions. So the body senses this. There are sensors in the body, and so it tries to correct. Now the sensors in the body sound an alarm, and when that happens, the correction is accomplished by the infusion of more insulin into the blood. Often when that happens, sometimes that's extreme. You come crashing down in an insulin charge. And so you can see there, not all of the balances are good balances. It depends on what we give the body to maintain balance with. If we give more sugar-neutral foods that are nutritious, the body's not so likely to get extremely off balance. These are really practical things. So you're not likely to a sugar high or to the low of hypoglycemia. So this balance swings back and forth until it comes as close as possible to evenness. This is why diabetics take a lot of protein, because protein is something that is slow digesting, and that it regulates. It may not be the best way, but it's a good way. Now, this is not to say that all sweet foods are bad, but that we should be careful about when and how much sweet things we take in. I happen to be one of those people that love sweets, and it's been the bane of my life, and I realize it is a desire for love that is manifested in sweet things, and in that desire for love I heal or I medicate myself with sugar things. Not so much anymore. In the last few years it's really become very much moderated. So again, probably the best things for moderating are vegetables, especially green leafy vegetables. In these talks, you're going to hear that phrase again and again because in so many things, green leafy vegetables are important. Now, maintaining the balance is important to our consciousness. I find that if I am not paying attention, or if I am having low blood sugar from not having eaten for a long time, my memory is not good. And when you're old, you don't want that to happen. But this is one of the biggest problems in the United States. Do you know that for the last few years, the average person in the United States drinks much more soda water than pure water? That is a problem because that's got other stimulants in it. As a consequence of this, diabetes is almost pandemic in the United States because the pancreas can't keep up with all of that, can't keep up making that kind of insulin all the time. The consequences of diabetes become horrible. In the latter stages, you have neuropathy and you have kidney failure. You can have blindness. I have a friend that went blind in the end of his life from kidney failure, from diabetes. In fact, when I had my surgery for having the lung removed, in the bed next to me was a man that was having a second operation for having part of the leg cut off because he had gangrene. So, the lesson of this is balance. Very serious balance. That's what the body screams for. Now, we don't have time to go into all the many homeostatic balances that there are. There are just too many for that. If we could talk here every night for a half a year just on homeostatic balances, and if this isn't tedious enough for you, that would certainly be. So what we're just trying to do here is ingrain in our consciousness the importance of balance. We're also trying to understand how balance and imbalance manifest in the dense physical body. And we're doing that so that we can have healthy lives and so that we can help other people to have healthy lives by respecting their bodies. When we are doing this, we're helping all of humanity. And when we're doing this, we're we're short-circuiting the need for healing. If we can get it before something has to be healed, that much the better. And we're also in this learning a lot of astrology so that we can get to the psychological causes of illnesses. Now we're going to look at one last balance, and it's probably the most important balance in the dense physical body, and we're going to, in future talks, come to this again and again and again. It is the balance of sodium and potassium in the human dense physical body. Actually, there are two families, the sodium family of minerals and ions, and the potassium family of minerals and ions. And this balance is critical. And it has less tolerance to deviation. Sodium and potassium are used in many, many different ways in the dense physical body. Sodium is important for building form. And there are two times in a person's life when a person may have a high sodium chemistry, blood chemistry. And those two cases are, one is in the fetus, because sodium elements are conducive to rapid building of form. And so it's obvious that in the fetus where the body is being built very rapidly, it's important. The other case isn't always present, but it is when a person has cancer. The saline condition of the blood promotes the rapid growth of tumors. In fact, that's what a tumor is. A tumor is a sac of salt water and amorphous protein. Now this tells us very clearly the danger of too much salt in the diet. The body will do whatever it can to keep from being too much, from becoming too sodium, but why stress the body? Now again, there's too much in this for now to illustrate all of the sodium-potassium balance. Again, and these are really baby talks. We're just at the beginning fringes of things. So the danger usually is too much sodium and not enough, comparatively speaking, of potassium. And you know what foods are rich in potassium, and that potassium family, green leafy vegetables, are rich in potassium. Now, there are many other functions of sodium and potassium in the body. For instance, sodium-potassium interactions are necessary for all nerve impulses to pass down the nerves. They're all accomplished by losing and regaining sodium-potassium balance. One of the most important manifestations of sodium-potassium is in the interaction between the inter- and intracellular fluids. The cellular fluid inside the cell is basically the chemistry potassium family oriented. And in the interstices between the cells, that interstitial fluid is basically the sodium family. Now, enormous amounts of energy are spent in all of these sodium-potassium balances. In fact, by far, the greatest amount of energy spent in the physical body is spent maintaining the sodium-potassium balance. It's an almost unbelievable fact. If you run a mile, the energy that you have expended in running is not as much as the energy that you have expended in maintaining the sodium-potassium balance while you were running. Now we use a sports cliche. At the end of the day, sodium wins. And it begins by invading into the cell. But when it wins, it loses. When the interstitial fluid begins to invade the cells, what happens is in the chemical reactions, lactic acid is formed. Very tiny amounts of lactic acid. And the lactic acid accumulates in the brain, especially in the hypothalamus, and that's part of the going to sleep mechanism. It's only the physical, chemical part of it. This is why taking a glass of milk for some people helps them to fall asleep. Now, this is not a contradiction to other parts of the Rosicrucian philosophy. We're told that when the vital body gets tired, it withdraws from the physical body, and we call that falling asleep. And that's perfect. That's the more inner world part of falling asleep. Now, the astrology of this is so fantastically beautiful. The vital body is ruled by the sun. The vital body had its conception in the sun period. In the dense physical body, potassium is ruled by the sun. In the dense physical body, sodium is ruled by the moon. And the Rosicrucian philosophy teaches that the building, especially in the fetus of the dense physical body, that's all ruled by the moon. So in the intrauterine period, when the chemistry is sodium balanced, that is when there is more rapid growth, and that takes place, and that's ruled by the moon. Milk and lactic acid are ruled by the moon. So in the interaction, when the sodium invades into the cell and it produces lactic acid, this is just what you would expect when the moon begins to rule. So the moon rules the desire body, and the desire body had its inception in the moon period. So we see reflected in the very basic chemistry of the physical body, we see reflected the struggle between the desire body and the vital body in the struggle between sodium and potassium in the physical body. It's just beautiful. It's amazing how this all takes place. This is an extremely important balance. It's the balance that makes life possible. And it is a balance between the solar and the lunar forces. Now, if you look in a horoscope, which we don't have time to do, you can determine the excesses and deficiency of sodium and potassium by the nature or the relationship between the sun and the moon. By observing yourself in the lunation cycle between the sun and the moon, you can see how we discharge and accumulate fluids in our body. Because the fluids go with the moon. When the moon picks up, the fluids pick up. I notice that when I floss my teeth at phases of the moon, when the moon is stronger, I have some teeth that are set really close to each other, and it's hard to floss them because there has been swelling in the gums. Now, the sodium and potassium balance is so fundamental to life that it's hard to break it up. Cases of extreme potassium deficiency where people actually eject potassium and don't take it into them are very rare, because this is really fundamental, and the body takes care that this doesn't happen. But it's easier to maintain a sustained energy and a healthy body by doing things with food that make this balance possible or easier. Again, raw, fresh, green, leafy vegetables are especially important for bringing in that solar potassium. They also, if we take them in raw, they strengthen the solar vital body, even without doing it with the ions. Now, this is an extremely small statement about the Libra principle of homeostasis. We could give more talks about it, and as I continue these talks, which I hope to do, the subject will be returned to again and again. In fact, it's going to be returned tomorrow evening when we talk about Scorpio. It's just all a very beautiful thing. I hope all of this, seeing how all of these things work and how they can be understood and be in harmony with the cosmos is, I hope that's encouraging so that we can get more people to study physiology. All right, next time we're going to study Scorpio, and for now we'll close with the Rosicrucian student's prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Yes.
Libra principle is balance. The Aries principle is
Aries wants things to change. It demands change.
So when you
I talked about two different balances. The balance principle itself, which is Libra, and how Libra is balanced by Aries. Those are two different things.
So when you use the bite principle, it's easier to balance
If you're
when the bite is moving.
right,
Aries.
that's Aries, correct. When you're going forward, Aries always wants to go forward. It wants a car that doesn't even have a reverse gear in it.
Changing forward.
Yeah.
Are you going to talk about all the principles of each sign?
Many times. Right now I am working on the Pisces principle and talking about how alcoholism works on the physical body psychologically and physically, and what happens, and how it's beautiful how it all ties together with Neptune and Jupiter. Tomorrow night we're going to talk about the Scorpio principle in the large intestine, and on Wednesday night we'll talk about stroke, Jupiter ruling Sagittarius. It's the Sagittarius principle. And Thursday we're going to talk about ossification of bones and how that is shown astrologically and spiritually. And then on Friday night we're going to talk about the endocrine system, which is ruled by Uranus, which rules the pituitary body. It's the captain of the endocrine system. All right. Thank you very much.